Hi, it's Doug Kaye. I'm here with another in our series of Meet Our Members for the Marin Photo Club. And my guest today is none other than Hawaiian shirt wearing Harvey Abernathy. Hey, Harvey, how are you?
I'm just great, Doug. Yeah.
It's good. It's good to see you. And let me see if I can show the two shirts. They're very close. They're very similar. But I'm glad to see that
Yeah,
you got the memo and you're wearing the right outfit for the day.
that's right. Right. I got the right background for my work here.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Harvey, you've done some great stuff. I don't know if you remember the time you and I went out to Point Reyes together to shoot some night stuff, and all we got was fog. But
Yeah.
we've gotten to know you as a night photographer extraordinaire, but we're going to learn a lot more about your background. Harvey, where did you grow up?
Well, in the central part of North Dakota, right below the Canadian border.
It sounds cold and desolate to me.
Well, it was actually an old sea bottom, the area where I grew up in. We used to see mirages in the horizon. The weather conditions were right. It was, agricultural community, a small community. There was
Yeah.
probably a little under 300 people in the town. And being a baby boomer, I was in the largest class in the school, which went from grade 1 through 12.
Yeah.
My class was 21 people. I graduated with
You
22.
That was the big one. Okay.
Yeah, we were the largest in the school.
Very good. And so let's get right into it. What were your very earliest experiences in photography?
Well, my first opportunity was to photograph with a Brownie Target 6. Um,
Is that the camera or is that a different one?
that is the camera. Um,
Wow.
I actually have a picture to share with my mom holding that camera along with a Brownie, Kodak Brownie 8 millimeter movie camera.
Really? Wow.
And of course, later on, I graduated to a, a Canon FTB, which was my first um, real interchangeable lens camera that I had gotten in 1975. And I
Have you
was shooting.
have you ever gotten rid of any of your cameras, or do you have all the cameras you've ever owned?
No, I don't have my first Yashica, which I purchased at Kmart in 1971 on a payment plan.
Probably probably a $50 camera, right?
It was a little more than that, but at the time, it was,
Yeah.
I didn't have enough money to buy it outright. I knew that.
So what did you shoot with that Brownie?
Well, I actually have some photos to tell a little story about
Let's
that if you
let's
want to.
let's get started
Right.
with the pictures then. No point in looking at the two of us old
Yeah,
guys.
yeah, yeah. Because I can give you some background. It was
Okay,
a
good.
fun process for me to go through some history. There's plenty of history and lots of stories there, and I needed to figure out how to segregate those down into some key points for me. So that's what I did in my
All right.
compilation of photos.
I'm going to let you tell your own story through the photos.
All right. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to to ask them.
Will do.
All right.
Beautiful. Uh-huh.
Seeing that okay?
Yep.
So yeah, this is the
If
farm
you
that I
if
grew
you
up
if
on.
you if you move your mouse off to the side, I think
Yeah.
we'll get rid of the
Oops,
no,
not
not
that
those
far.
guys. I'm seeing. There we go. Perfect. Perfect.
Um, yeah, like I had mentioned, the area that we grew up in was an old sea bottom. It was one of the last receding seas in North America, and so we saw 180-degree skies from horizon to horizon, any direction you wanted to look other than trees. And at the time that this area was originally populated, there were no trees. They were all brought by humans. And the house on the right hand side was the house that my father built in 1959. I was uh, about 6 years old when we moved into that house. The old house, which was torn down, was in that grass area on the left hand side. It was a farmhouse that was built in the late 1800s. It didn't have any indoor plumbing in it. So we lived in that house with a hand pump to a cistern for going up to the kitchen, and that was the only water. We had to use an outhouse, which was tough during the winter. And so, it was a remote area,
Mhm.
country area. We lived about 7 miles from the small town that I grew up next to, where I went to school. So we had chores, didn't have a lot of time to do much other than help out on the farm. Um, next to, okay, hang on, I'm not getting the scroll here. There we go. Next to our farm there, just 3/4 of a mile to the west of us, was my grandparents' farm on my mother's side. She was one of 12 children, and most of her siblings were in different parts of the country. And during the summer, my cousins and aunts and uncles would come and visit my grandparents, and we would gather together in gatherings. Um, that's my mother on the left-hand side. You can see her holding the movie camera and the Brownie Target 6 camera.
Mhm.
This was taken fairly close to about the time that I first was able to shoot with that camera. But what was interesting to me was how, when we would gather together, you can see my uncle's also carrying a camera, there was always family photos taken. My grandparents on the right hand side. This was a very typical scene whenever we would gather together. But also, what we would do is we would share photo albums from the years before when people gathered together. And so it was all about recording history in the family. And I was always intrigued by that. So when I was 9 years old, there was a big event going on in about 13 miles from where our farm was. And the Minot Air Force Base, which was being built at that time, was bringing in the first B-52 bombers. They were called the Peace Persuaders. And there was a public day that they had opened up the Air Force for the public to come in to an air show. And they were demonstrating the B-52 bombers. My father grabs the movie camera that my mother's holding there. And as we're getting ready to leave, he's leaving the Brownie Target 6 camera behind. And I had seen how he had put film in before. I kind of knew the process of photographing. And so I asked him, probably whined a bit about it, being 9 years old, that I wanted to take the Brownie camera and photograph for myself. And so he did let me take it. I imagine he probably carried it most of the day. Also, being 9 years old, I was probably all over the place because they actually let us inside one of those B-52 bombers. But I did take my own photos that day, and when they came back, when the film was developed, I was just so entranced with the idea that I could record my history. And so we progressed forward. I never had the money to buy a camera. During that time frame, I had always wanted one, but my dad had a couple other different cameras that he'd gotten through the years. I graduated from high school, and by 1971, I was able to purchase my first SLR camera. And as I mentioned, that was the one I got at Kmart. And at the same time, I also purchased a 1966 Ford van. That's me and my sister and my first niece. And this was shortly before I was drafted in 1972. And they didn't take me at the last minute. I was actually had put the van, took the wheels off, and had it on blocks on the farm and said goodbye to the family. But at the last minute, before I got on the flight to boot camp in Washington, they decided they didn't want me. There's a bit of a story behind all that, and I'm not going to go into all of that. But I came back to the farm. My family thought I'd gone AWOL. And we lived right next to Canada. It would have been pretty easy to have skipped up to Canada. A lot of people did in that area. And so my sister was visiting, and I drove the van out to California to give her a ride out there because she was dating a guy going to Davis at the time. And so she was visiting to say goodbye to me before I went into the military. So I got out to California, and of course, I had to get a job to earn enough money to get back. And I started playing around with black and white when I was in California. San Rafael had a dark room that you could go in and rent time on an enlarger, and so I was playing with black and white during that time frame, and I eventually upgraded to the Canon FTB camera, which was the first Canon that had through the lens metering on it, and I never really had any formal training. I was intrigued though with low light. I loved the bulb mode on the camera, and this is one of my first images where I was doing a tripod shot with on bulb mode with my camera, which, in those days without training, it was really difficult to figure out your timing for exposure because film had a reciprocity failure, and you had to really calculate your time of your shots. So this was my first, what I considered night image that I took. I was doing a construction project at the Royal Towers in San Francisco on Taylor Street. And I showed up one morning about 5:30. So this is technically not a night shot because it's taken just before sunrise. But it was the first time that I'd really started to study the process of night photography, going to the library, reading library books. Never took any classes or any formal study. I got a 8-inch Bosch and Lomb telescope and learned how to attach my Canon camera to the telescope and started photographing the night skies because I was intrigued with that, having grown up with the night skies in North Dakota. And I was preparing for Halley's Comet in 1986, and I shot a number of rolls of film beforehand, trying to figure out exposure values because we didn't have the immediate gratification of seeing the viewfinder. And so I was able to get a picture of Halley's Comet, and that really started getting me into photographing of the night skies. But unfortunately, with film cameras, you can't photograph to terrestrial along with the night skies. You just can't. You wouldn't be able to do that on film. So, moving forward, I bought my first DSLR in 2008, and I took one of the first photo workshops. I had decided I wanted to get some formal training. And this is in the Ruby Mountains, Lamoille Canyon, which is just outside of Elko, Nevada. And to me, this rivals Yosemite in this area. It's just a beautiful area. Alpine lakes up in the mountains. And I was camping right next to this creek. And I was trying to do night photography at that time. So, I got the campfires on the right-hand side there. And now with digital, I'm able to actually look at the back of the viewfinder and see what I'm doing and play with it and learn exposure times, how fast to move a flashlight, showing it at the camera. And that same year in 2008, I took a photo workshop with Tim Baskerville of the Nocturnes. He was doing a class at the College of Marin in night photography. And this image is one I actually captured in that class and has become one of my limited edition portfolio images. I just love the colors and the light in this image.
Yeah, gorgeous image.
And so, I really started playing a lot with night photography. I started taking more workshops and classes in it. I was studying Photoshop. I was taking a print class, learning how to print during this time frame. And around the late 2009, I had met Gail Pierce. She had a show going on in a restaurant in Novato, and in the print class that I had taken, we were printing on Epson 2400 printers, and so I had purchased one, and I was trying to really get good at printing because I was at this point starting to develop a business called Night and Day Photos, and I was getting ready to retire. Made the decision about that time frame, but I wasn't really ready to retire. Just needed to get out of the work I was doing and the business I was in, which was the same business that I started working in when I came out to California in 1972. So
What was that? What was that business? What kind of work were you doing?
waterproofing, construction, doing coatings and sealants. And then I realized I was really good at troubleshooting leaks in buildings and started doing consulting only. And I merged with another consultant, and we set up a fairly successful consulting business doing forensic investigations on problem buildings. In fact, a number of those high-rise buildings in San Francisco there, I've been on the outside of quite a few of those,
Hmm.
inspecting them and determining how to keep them watertight. So it was a good business. And but I was ready to retire. And so I'd actually hired Gail to teach me how to print because I had taken the class from Stephen Johnson down in Pacifica, and he's a great teacher, but it was really complicated getting the settings right in Photoshop, and I was struggling with it. And so I'd seen that she had printed on an Epson 2400 in her artist statement, and I decided to hire her. And so she told me about the Marin Photo Club. And so I joined in January of 2010, and this was my one of the images that I submitted in the competition. I dove right in immediately and started submitting images, and I got a first place in creative for this image. Now, today, when I look at it, I don't think of it as a great image, but it was really enhancing to me to see that I could get feedback on my images. And I was really looking at starting to sell work at that point in time, establishing it as a business. This is my first published image in a AAA magazine called The Traveler.
Hmm.
And I also, in 2010, was in an honorable mention amongst 47,000 photos from around the world at the Sony World Photography competition. And I got this one published in a book that they produced of the honorable mentions and the winners. And so I was really, getting down to printing by this point in time and starting to exhibit my work and showing in studios and really started to dive in by 2011 wherein I retired. And by 2012, I took a class in advanced portfolio because I needed to develop a website. I needed to put a portfolio together. There was a class taught by Gear Jordal and Oliver Klink at Hayward Photo Central. And it was a 7-month course. And we were supposed to come with 12 images, and I brought 12 of the best images that I thought I had at the time. And Gear Jordal was looking over the 12 printed images that I'd laid out on the table. And I had some night images in there and some day images. And I had this one image in there that I had done after a class that I'd taken out at Point Reyes National Seashore from instructor Jimmy Katz, who lives in Bolinas out there. And he was teaching a class on abstract photography. And so Gear Jordal was looking through these images, and he puts his finger on this image and he says, "That's what I want you to do." I said, "Well, I'm not very confident with that type of work. I'm a very literal photographer. I like things sharp. I like my horizon lines to be straight. And this is out of my comfort zone. Well, this class went on for 7 months. I spent 7 months doing just that work. It was really fun. Um, Got me out of my comfort zone. I was really photographing for tone and color, going to gardens. Didn't matter whether it was windy or not. Sometimes I would let the wind do the movement, and I created a portfolio of 15 images. This is just some representative samples from that portfolio. And it was really a fun project. I just had a great time with it. And we kept meeting once a month, and we would go over where we were at and how we were progressing. And then at the end of that, those 7 months, there was a gallery showing where each one of the photographers that were in this course, and you'll see Wendy Hannum's name on there. She was also in the class. We were going to do a gallery showing starting on October 19th of 2012. And just before that time, in August, I had submitted an image to a National Geographic contest that was co-sponsored by the Tourism Authority of Thailand. And they were going to pick 7 winners out of a series of, I think it was 7 weeks that they had showing. You submit images for 7 weeks, and then the editors of the National Geographic magazine would pick some winners for, I think, between 8 and 12 each week. And then of those, they had this National Geographic photographer that went over all those images at the end of the 7 weeks and picked them and announced in October 2012 who the winners were. And I had actually forgot that I had submitted images because I was doing that quite a bit at the time to various publications and contests. And around October 5th, I had received an email that said, "You have won." This was, of course, during the time when the Nigerian scammers were sending out emails
Oh,
2 or 3
yeah.
a
Yeah.
day. And my email address was getting pretty compromised. And I would just hit delete, 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 delete. And I saw "You have won." And I was just ready to hit the delete key. And I saw in the preview of the email an image of mine. And this was the image that was inside of that email. And I started to read the email and realized I had won. I was one of the 7 photographers picked out of the 7 weeks that people were submitting them throughout the world. And the National Geographic photographer selected this image as one of the winners. So I was pretty excited about that. And this was happening all at the same time as I was preparing for my portfolio for this gallery showing. And part of that process was we had to submit press releases to newspapers throughout the Bay Area and publications. And I was preparing those press releases, and the Marin IJ was going to do an article on me for that, the journey show that I was doing. At the same time, I was waiting for National Geographic to tell me that I could also announce the winning of this competition, because they had to public announce it first before we could announce it to the public. And the morning of the day that they were coming out to photograph me for the IJ article, they told me that I could release the information. So I was submitting a press release then for not only that, but also for the winning the competition. So I got written up in a few newspapers as a result of that. And it was, I was getting pretty good kudos for my work by that point in time. So this is
that's a great image. I remember seeing that one.
Yeah. This is pretty
gorgeous.
much a signature image for me.
Yeah, I think so.
It's in my limited edition portfolio. I've sold quite a few copies of that. I only have about 2 or 3 left in my my edition. In fact, I just sold one of those recently here in March. This is the group that we traveled with. This woman here This is Allison Wright. She was a National Geographic photographer who selected the winning images, and there was a couple of people there that were representatives of the Tourism Authority of Thailand, and the rest of us were from around the world. And it was really fun traveling with them. We had 9 days. We were staying in five-star hotels. We were never once ordered a meal. They would just have these meals prepared for us. They would set plates out in front of us of foods that I never thought I would eat. Some of them were pretty exotic, and I didn't even want to ask what they were, but everything was really good. And we had a great time. We were getting up in the morning, usually around 5 o'clock, and not finishing until midnight every day. No time for jet lag. We hit the ground running and never stopped for 9 days. They took us to three major cities in Thailand. We visited temples and some of the highlighted sites throughout Thailand. It was just a really incredible process. I shot over 8,000 photos in those 9 days because we were moving fast. We didn't have a lot of time to set up and really play in any particular area. It was just a beautiful time. And we went up to northern Thailand to the Hill Tribe people, which were displaced Burmese people, and the wives and the family would have these towns where the tourists would come to. And I spent almost 2 hours with this one woman and her two children here. The first half hour, I just put the cameras down and sat and watched and visited with the children, and before I ever even started photographing her. And I was really looking at, she was moving so fast. I couldn't even stop the shutter down or speed it up enough to stop her hands in motion. She was moving so fast. And it was just really a wonderful time that I spent with her there and her children. And I ended up buying about 6 or 7 scarves that she was making because they were like $8 a piece. It was just incredible. I brought them back, gifts for the family. That night we went to the Loy Krathong Festival in Chiang Mai. And from long before it even got dark, there were thousands and thousands of these lanterns being lit and lifted off, and it was just really an enhancing experience. They were floating these memorials made out of candles with flowers on them down the river, and these lanterns were going up in the sky. I would imagine probably a couple 100,000 were lit off that night. They were also coming back down. You had to be careful. They were landing on people's heads when they would come back down too. But this went on all night long. And so I didn't finish up till about 1 o'clock in the morning. And just
Wow, look at that.
photographing the full moon with the lanterns. And I'm still doing night work even while I was there. The next morning, we get up long before sunrise, travel up to the northern Thailand, and get in a balloon going out over the rice paddies and temples out in the middle of the agricultural fields. And then we'd do elephant rides through a forest, down through a river, back up through the forest again. And this was all done before breakfast.
Gee.
And this was what every day was like. It was just, we were just constantly being shepherded here and there and photographing and participating in what Thailand had to offer. This was the last hotel room we were in, a 5-star hotel. I was standing out on the patio. They had these upholstered lounge chairs out there and a huge copper bathtub. And that morning was the only morning that we really had to enjoy the time that we had in any of the hotels. And we had about 4 hours, and I took a bath out on the patio deck out there. It was pretty exciting, but that was the last day of our time there. And then we were supposed to, when we come back, we had 2 days to process images and submit 200 of them to the Tourism Authority of Thailand. And they have been using our images as part of their promotional marketing on social media and stuff. So it was kind of a fun project that we went through.
I imagine imagine they got their money's worth by sponsoring the event, huh?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And really, it wasn't, I had to pay taxes on the winnings. They value it, and I ended up having to pay taxes on it, but it was well worth the trip.
Mm-hmm.
So I continued with my night photography. I was now doing open studios, both Marin, San Francisco. I was getting my work hung any place I could, restaurants and galleries. And of course, we've had a lot of stuff through the Marin Photo Club, which has been helpful. And because I had printed a lot of work up by this time since I was doing open studios, started those in 2013. And so, I just was continuing to add to my portfolio. I've done a whole series of moon and bridge shots, and I continue to do those. I just did one earlier this winter.
I'm looking at this. I'm trying to figure out where you are for this. You're outside the gate. What is this?
It took me about 40 hours of research and work to make this happen. I spent a lot of time on this one, just calculating where I could catch the rising moon. And I always shoot a crescent moon, by the way. I think if you've seen some of my images before, you'll see that most of them, I shoot a crescent moon. I don't shoot a full moon because the exposure values with the full moon are hard to balance. And with a crescent moon, it doesn't matter if that little bit is blowing out. You can see the reflective light on the rest of the moon because it's bouncing off of the sunlight's bouncing off of Earth and lighting up the moon. And the camera picks it up really well. This is taken from Kirby Cove.
Ah, okay.
Which
Well,
is
I thought it was farther out on the water, maybe.
No, it's there's a little beach at Kirby Cove. I had, using Google Maps and the photographer's ephemeris, I determined that during low tide, if the moon was rising, it would show up just above that rock outcropping before the Spencer's Point there. I think it's Spencer's Point.
Spencer's, yeah.
Yeah, and show up
battery Spencer, they call that area.
Battery Spencer, yeah.
Right.
And so I knew that the moon, there would be a very short window of time when it would pass that rock and come up underneath the bridge, but it had to be low tide. And I also wanted to include the new Bay Bridge Tower, which was completed shortly before that. So it took a lot of time to figure out how to get a campsite out there because it's a mile walk straight down a cliff to get there. And you can drive down there if you have a camping permit. And I wanted to get campsite number one, which was just up off the beach with the background of San Francisco at the campsite. And so it took a lot of research to figure out how to accomplish that. And then I reserved 2 days, 2 nights out there, knowing the weather might not cooperate. But the first night, it was absolutely perfect. Nice clear skies, no wind. I got up about 4 a.m. to catch the rising moon. And it wasn't easy because I don't know if you notice in the center of the image in the water there's actually a container ship that was coming through the gate. I was standing right at the edge of the water, set up to photograph as the moon just started to rise above that rock, and the waves from that container ship came in and swamped me. I had to grab my camera, run up the beach, run back down, and set up again to get this shot.
Interesting. I didn't notice the blurry ship image there until you pointed it out.
Yeah. Well, the waves from that were, because I was right at the edge of the water.
Mhm.
I had to do it during a lower tide in order to get far enough out in the beach to get the Bay Bridge included in the image.
Mhm.
So it was a lot of work. So fast forward now to shelter in place,
Mhm.
and I'm still photographing at night in my garage. I was doing a reflections project for I'm a leader of the uh, digital camera club through ESCOM, the College of Marin's ESCOM, and we were doing a challenge for this month of April on reflection. So I thought I'd do some light painting and night work on a still life. So this is what I've been working on most recently now
Very nice.
in our shelter in place. So and it's all light painted. I'm painting this. There's 3 shots blended here of different light painting. I'm trying to do still lifes while we can't go out anywhere.
Beautiful
So,
work.
and that's kind of the final image that I have in my
Well,
program here.
this is great. Harvey, I got to tell you, you've made this so easy for me because every time I thought of a question, I paused and then you answered my question already, which was great.
All
Why
right.
don't you go ahead and unshare and let's see your face
Okay.
again. There you are.
All right.
Um, great. Let me see what I'm doing wrong here. Hang on a second here. Okay. So marvelous images, Harvey. And as you've said to me, most people think of you as a night photographer because you've done so much of that in the last 2 years. But you've had a terrific landscape and even I'd almost call it street photography. I mean, some of the images from Vietnam were pretty, Thailand were pretty
Thailand.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. There
Yeah,
was a lot of street photography there.
yeah. So you've been a member of the club for about 10 years,
Yep.
and how would you say the club has helped you? In what ways has the club helped you in your photography?
Oh, well, I would say dramatically. Both the critiques have been a great educational process. I love the opportunity to go to the meetings and hear these subjective opinions from a variety of photographers, which I've learned over time it is a subjective process. And I didn't always necessarily agree with everything that was being taught either in workshops or through the critiques with the club. But I recognize that each one of them is a tool, and it's a part of a tool that betters a person as a photographer. And I think I've gained a lot from participating in the club. And of course, the other aspect of it is social. Being around other photographers that are uh, photographing and going out together, and that part of it is also very educational, and you learn a lot by being next to someone, and then you also can share things that you're doing.
Yeah,
In fact,
true.
that one temple image that I was shot where there was a reflection in the water, there was just a little pool of water on the
Yeah.
sidewalk. I was laying down on the sidewalk and I took that photo and I showed it to the National Geographic photographer, and she got all excited about it. She says, "I've never really done that before." And so, she learned from me. And
Yeah.
I felt really good about that. And then everybody came over and they were all shooting that little puddle with the temple behind it.
Well, I don't know. Yours is probably the best. It looked really good.
Yeah.
Um, so, okay. So we've seen what you're doing during shelter in place. What are you most looking forward to shooting once the restrictions are lifted?
Well, I'm missing the opportunity. I was really geared up to do a lot of macro this spring and flowers, and that was kind of what prompted me to do flower photography and in still life because uh, unfortunately, by the time this is over with, the flowers and wildflowers are going to be gone. So I'm not sure. I'll probably go back out and do some more night work.
Well, by the time it's really done, you'll probably be ready for next season's wildflowers, I think.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, the Milky Way is best during the middle of the summer. July and August is the best time to shoot the core of the Milky Way. and that's probably what I'll concentrate on next. Unfortunately, you have to travel to do it. There's not a lot of places in the Bay Area where you can shoot the Milky Way,
Yeah,
because
that's true.
the Milky Way is to the south, southwest, and southeast, and we've got too much light
Cities.
pollution here.
Yeah. Yeah. What when you do shoot the Milky Way locally, where do you tend to go?
Point Reyes,
Yeah.
Western Point, during July and August, in the early morning hours, late night, early morning hours. The Milky Way is towards the southwest, and Point Reyes, being so far west, gets you out of the light pollution of the San Francisco area. So
Very
you're
good.
shooting out over the ocean.
Very
And
good.
Drake's Bay is my favorite spot. I've got a couple of those in my portfolio.
Very good. Well, Harvey, this has been terrific. I really appreciate you taking the time, first of all, to organize the images so well. You
Well,
told a
thank you.
great story, and I'm sure that everybody's going to be fascinated to hear your evolution through photography. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of other stories in there too, but
Okay, well, thank you again. I want to say thanks. Let me see if I can just change the screen here. What have I got to do? All right. Um, thank you once again, Harvey, and thank you to all for watching and listening. And I hope you'll join me next time for another episode of Meet Our Members. Bye-bye.
thanks, Doug.
Thank you.